People can't afford to buy houses anymore, and it's actually not their fault. In the year 2000, the average UK house cost around £80,000, and the median full-time salary was just under £19,000. That means a typical home costs a little over 4 times what the average person was earning in a year. Fast forward to 2015, the average cost for a UK house jumped to £197,000, whilst the median full-time salary had just crept up to £27,000. So that gap had now widened from needing around 4 times your salary to needing around 7 times your salary. Today, the average UK home costs you around £270,000, whilst the median full-time salary is just over £39,000. So in just over 25 years, salaries have just about doubled, whilst house prices have actually more than tripled. So whilst in the year 2000, saving for around a 10% deposit of the average UK property price would have taken maybe 5 months of your salary, today that same 10% deposit takes roughly 8 months of your gross salary. And that's before we're considering tax, the new cost of living pressures that we're experiencing, and so forth. Then to make matters worse, the higher tax rate threshold has been frozen at £50,270 since 2021, and we know that from the last autumn budget, that will be frozen now until 2031 at the very least. If that threshold had actually risen in line with inflation, it would actually be sitting today at around £63,000. So for anyone sitting in that category, every additional pound they are saving towards maybe a house deposit is being taxed at a higher rate than it would be if the actual income thresholds had moved in line with inflation. So today, the average first-time buyer in the UK is around 34 years old, whilst in the 1990s it was around 29, which means that the average person is waiting an additional 5 years to actually get onto the property ladder, and that is an accumulation of all the factors considered. So when people say that the younger generation needs to be budgeting better and not buying coffees, well, it's not completely true. The budgeting aspect, yes, of course, I completely agree, but the math actually tells a completely different story. Salaries have only doubled whilst house prices have tripled, and thresholds are being frozen. So the average first-time buyer being well into their 30s isn't just a spending problem, it's a structural problem. So whilst you might not be able to fix all the structural issues on your own, it's why there are a number of things that are incredibly important to stay up to date with. So of course, yes, having a solid budgeting system in place, but also understanding how policies and thresholds actually affect you so that you can respond to them appropriately. So I say that to say, if you aren't yet on the property ladder well into your 30s, it probably isn't your fault, and the stats are actually there to prove that.
I guess what I'd start by saying is do the maths, do the maths, do the maths, do the maths. And unfortunately, the big problem is most people just don't do the maths. I guess there's a whole pocket of people who can't do the maths because they don't know what the maths is to be done. But this is some of the maths that needs to be done. You need to have an understanding of what's going on in the landscape. Okay, property prices tripling, but income's only doubling. And then you have to have a plan of action. So my question is, why aren't you house hacking? Why aren't you finding something else to do in order for you and your family and your community to break through? If you're interested in learning more about house hacking, go and check the description of this video and go get my book, The Cash Flow Kickstart, so you can start. And the moment you jump into that book, you'll see some of the things I break down, which are key to exactly what we're talking about right here. It's understanding that the landscape is stacked against you. And if the landscape is stacked against you, you have to ask yourself a empowering question. And that question is simply, what can I do? The challenge is we live in a society where when people feel like the landscape is stacked against them, they don't go and take the next step to ask, what can they do about it? Because a lot of the time, just asking that question, what can I do about the fact the landscape is stacked? That will unlock opportunities for you. That will unlock information for you. And once you get the insight, once you get the hindsight, and once you get the foresight, that's when you are best positioned in order to get oversight. I think some of the crucial nuggets shared in this video, which are super pertinent for us, is to understand the wider picture. And the moment we get a good grasp on that wider picture, that predicament, that position, and okay, house prices have tripled, so they potentially could be assets on the holistic general side of things. Incomes have only doubled over the same period of time. Okay, so potentially in relation to house prices, incomes are not as valuable as assets. So now the moment you think about that, you can start creating your own plan of action. Okay, how can I acquire more houses so that the houses, as they increase in value over time, let's say they triple again in the next 20 years, 30 years, right? How do I get some of that additional growth rather than focusing on my income, which will only double in the next same period, right? These are questions. Yes, they're semi-complex questions at times, but they become less complex the more we engage with them, the more we ask ourselves them, the more we speak to people who have figured the answers to these questions out. And just like all good, great maths, there's typically one answer to every question. 5 plus 2 is equal to 7 on every single day, twice on a Sunday, right? The beautiful thing about that is you know where you stand the moment you begin to stand. The problem is most of us are so used to subjects like English, where, you know, half of it's made up, that we don't actually realize that these things are actually mathematical. Our wealth creation is actually a mathematical equation. Our revenue and income generation is actually a mathematical equation. Our cash flow situation is actually a mathematical equation. And the benefit about all of these things being mathematical equations is they can be worked out. They can actually be calculated. They can actually be demonstrated. And more importantly, someone can come along, if you don't know how to do it right now, and show you how to do it so you can know how to do it going forward. And this is how you end up being able to move further faster in your future as it pertains to your finances, because you got into a lane where people were able to come alongside you and help you see the future more plain. I don't know if this is something that people are struggling with in order to have that humility to say, you know what, I need to find a new path. I don't know if this is something that our country has just done a great job of through our education system. And yes, I'm partly to blame. I used to work in it and I was part of the problem teaching maths, you know, at secondary and A level, and seeing the curriculum disadvantage people on a day-to-day basis and saying to myself on the inside, I feel like I'm stealing and robbing from these people by teaching this curriculum the opportunity to actually become financially great. But this is part of the reason why I had to leave. And, you know, the Englishman says better late than never. I apologize, I left late, but I left, right? And this is the thing we have to understand. Yes, the education system is extremely valuable, but it also embeds a whole bunch of rhetoric, a whole bunch of mindsets, a whole bunch of ways of thinking that actually stop us from producing at our highest level. So the question is, how do I actually break through when I see that the game is rigged against me or against you? And the answer is very simple. It's get around people who have broken through already. The answer is very simple. It's learn what they are doing, regardless of how contrary it is to what you're currently doing. And obviously, I guess a side note to actually make mention of here right now is it's definitely going to be completely different to what you're doing right now. Because I think a lot of the time what happens is we see other people doing things that work. They tell us what they're doing that works, or we find out, we become privy to what they're doing that works. But then we say, because it's so different to what we're doing, we're never going to do that. Instead of realizing if what we were doing was the right thing, it will be producing for us the results we want. But because what we're doing is producing the results we are getting, we have to realize that what we're doing is most likely not the right thing. So what do you do next? Well, the next thing you do is you reach out to someone else who's doing something different to you. You find out what it is that they're endeavoring to do, and that's what you then actually do. I know it might sound like, oh, some of you like, that actually makes sense. Or some of you know what, you just twizzled me right here. But that's the path. The path to actually progress is actually learning something new, turning into that thing that's new, doing it so long you don't just turn, you now become stern. And after becoming stern, you get the opportunity to be able to earn. And this is why most people stay stuck in their perpetual cycles, which I call the cycle of sameness or the cycle of similarity, for year in, year out, decade in, decade out, generation in, generation out, because they never ever figure it out. And this is my only clarion call to you. If you're someone who's tuned in to this content, you find value in these videos, yes, like, comment, subscribe, do all of those things, become a part of the tribe. But the purpose of this tribe, the purpose of this content, the purpose of this value is to assist you to see that you can figure out things that the mainstream are saying are unfigureoutable, because they are figureoutable, because someone else has figured them out. So the only question we have to ask ourselves is, hold on a minute, are we going to take heed to the lessons that are there and not eat our seed based on greed, but instead allow our seed to be planted so it can over time produce for us everything we need? And this was the decision that I made a number of years ago, roughly in 2005, which is now 21 years ago. Wow, it doesn't even feel like it's been that long. But 21 years ago, I made that decision, you know, having celebrated my 18th birthday in prison, having been released from prison the second time, having said to myself, you know what, I don't want to go back a third time. I want my life to actually be a byproduct of the intelligence that God gave me. Everything changed for me in 2004, 2005. And this is part of what I started to realize. I started to realize that there's someone out there who's already achieved it. And like one of my first coaches ever said to me when I was 20 years old, Samuel, why take 70 years to learn what you can learn in 7 hours by reading the book of someone who had to take 70 years to write that book? And that's just the decision I made. I made that decision that I don't want to take that time. Instead, I want to time travel. And the best way that I can actually travel is by jumping in to the resources, the revenues, the opportunities that other people who have gone before us, the giants who have gone before us, have literally unpacked and revealed, so that we can jump into the packages that were previously sealed, right? So it might have been a decade ago, 2 decades ago, 5 decades ago, that you could only be what your parent was, right? If your dad was a carpenter, you're guaranteed to become a carpenter. But we don't live in that day and age anymore. We live in a day and age where we have access to information so we can create transformation and we can move to new levels without hesitation. So if that sounds good to you, you know what to do. Jump into the description below. Go get the book, The Cash Flow Kickstart, because that will help you move further faster in your future. Side by side with that, if you like this video, you know what to do. Like, comment, subscribe. Why not become a part of the tribe? Hit the bell notification so you get notified every single time we drop a video. And with all of that being said, please, please, please remember, small keys open big doors. So those big doors of yours can be opened up for sure, as long as you go grab those small keys. With that being said, Samuel ICanWin signing out. Good day. God bless. Let's go.
Small keys open big doors.